Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. At our second Women's Issues Think Tank day, month, we are so happy to have started this. In case you don't know, the Center for the Women of New York had plans for this think tank many years ago. We had a couple of hiccups, and we're very happy to be starting this program. We started last month with stalking, and we are doing pay equity today. We have amazing speakers, but I will let my Vice President introduce them. My name is Cecilia Venosta Weigel. I am the president of the Center for the Women of New York. The Center for the Women of New York has two locations. One is in Queensboro Hall, in Queens, obviously, and the other one is in Bayside, also in Queens, in Fort Totten. The Center for the Women of New York helps women overcome financial violence, social wellness, and legal issues by raising awareness and advocating for full gender equality for women, understanding their needs and connecting them with CWNY services, nonprofit partner organizations, and public resources to aid, uplift, and address their challenges. Next slide, please. Our current programs are referrals and advocate programs. So if you don't know if we offer a service and that you need, call us and we'll guide you in the right direction. And then we have financial literacy workshops, career workshop series, women in crisis and caregiver support groups. We have a one-on-one file tax preparation. So if you need your taxes done, we're doing that this month and half of April. We have gardening and sustainability workshops weekly in Fort Totten. Those are super fun, amazing, and grounding. We have conversational ESL classes, a legal support team that responds to inquiries via email. We have yoga classes also twice a week. We have self-esteem workshops. Those are amazing. So join us if you need a self-esteem booster. Those are in person as well in Fort Totten, Bayside. And we have this think tank. So happy to have it. Next slide, Lana. If you'd like to watch any of our past events, you can watch them at cwny.org/past-events. You can find all the videos there. So now I would like to turn it over to Victoria, who's going to be our moderator today. Victoria, do you want me to go through this slide before you start?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So before I turn it over to Victoria, if you have any questions during the panel, you can put them in the chat. We will let the panelists and the moderator respond to the questions as they come, or at the end of the presentation, depending on how the flow of the panel discussion is going. If you dialed in, our amazing volunteer, Lana Perloit, is monitoring our emails. So if you have any questions, please email them to events@cwny.org, and she will make sure to bring them up to the panel. And now I will turn it over to Victoria. Victoria, thank you so much for putting this together. Take it away.
Thank you, Cecilia. So my name is Victoria Pilati. I am the Vice President of the Center for the Women of New York, and I'm so pleased to introduce our illustrious and very accomplished panelists. Beverly Cooper Neufeld is the founder and president of PowHer New York. To address the slow progress on women's economic issues, Beverly envisioned PowHer New York, a community of over 100 organizations working across typical barriers to advance a multi-issue agenda, energize a movement, and accelerate progress. It is one of the innovative projects she has created as president of BCN Consulting Group, which helps nonprofits create change. Neufeld inspired and leads a decade-long statewide campaign for pay equity reform, now a signature program of PowHer New York. The Equal Pay Campaign influenced the passage of critical legislation, including the New York State Women's Equality Act and Equal Pay Act, and the New York City and New York State Salary History Ban, the New York State Paid Family Leave Law, and the New York City Salary Range Disclosure Law, and a New York State version to be signed into law. And I will then now introduce our next panelist. Next slide, please. Jessica Ramey Stender is the Policy Director and Deputy Legal Director of Equal Rights Advocates, where she leads policy advocacy with a focus on pay equity, sexual harassment, pregnancy discrimination, and education civil rights. She also represents workers in employment discrimination cases. Jessica co-chairs the Stronger California Advocates Network, a statewide network of organizations and advocacy coalitions promoting policy reform to improve economic security for women and families. She is also co-chair of the Women's Rights Committee of the American Bar Association Civil Rights and Social Justice Section and the Policy Committee of the National Task Force on Tradeswomen Issues. She also serves on the Board of Governors of California Women Lawyers. Jessica regularly speaks on the Board of Governors of California and writes about issues related to equal pay, sexual harassment, and gender equality, and was named one of the top labor and employment lawyers in California by the Daily Journal. Next slide, please. Okay. And now, let's start with Jessica. Can you provide some broader context about the wage gap and its causes?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be a part of this event, and of course, to be presenting alongside Bev, who's such an incredible equal pay advocate that I've been lucky enough to work alongside. So we wanted to start with, as you heard, kind of an overview of what we're talking about when we talk about the wage gap to ground us in this discussion. I do have a couple slides, so I'm going to share them right now. Give me 1 minute. Okay. And then I'm going to make this full screen. Here we go. It's going to work. Okay. So while I try to make this full screen, I wanted to give you an overview of, first of all, when we talk about the wage gap, there are some questions about what we really mean. Often when you hear kind of these high level numbers of, let's say 80, now it's about 77 cents, depending on how you calculate it, to the dollar for women overall. And then of course the gaps are larger for women of color. We're talking about wage gaps that are calculated. Can you see my screen okay? Okay. Based on US Census Bureau data. And so for anyone who's kind of questioning how these numbers how we arrive at these numbers, it's based on US Census Bureau data that's collected on people with earnings. Traditionally, the gap was calculated looking at full-time year-round working people. So comparing full-time year-round working women versus full-time year-round working men. We as a kind of pay equity community have decided to be more inclusive in our wage gap calculations and include also part-time and part-year workers, meaning you're looking at all of the data that the US Census Bureau collects for all people with earnings. So the numbers you're seeing here are wage gap numbers for all earners for whom there is data. Full-time year-round, part-time, and part-year. And as you can see, they're still pretty dismal. So for women overall, without taking race or ethnicity into account, we have a wage gap of 77 cents as compared to men overall. And I'm happy to provide the other number of just full-time year-round workers separately, but this is for all earners. Then we have for women of color, most of whom the wage gap is much worse. For Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander women, overall, it's a slightly better, it's still not good, but 80 cents to every dollar earned by their white, non-Hispanic male counterparts. However, within that community of AA and HPI women, there are some groups that have much larger wage gaps, like Cambodian women, Hmong women, and others who have a much larger wage gap. So I want to note that. Black women, as compared to their white male non-Hispanic counterparts, it's just 64 cents to the dollar. Latinas, 54 cents, and Native women, 51 cents. So we kind of like to ground everyone in these numbers as a reminder that this gap takes an incredible toll on women themselves, particularly women of color, but also given that women are now more often the primary or co-breadwinners in their families, it really takes a toll on families and the broader economy that women are still being underpaid as compared to their male counterparts. I'm going to go to the next slide. So we wanted to talk, as you heard from Victoria, a little bit about some of the different contributors to those kind of aggregate wage gaps. So one of them is, of course, there still is intentional discrimination. There still is a lack of equal pay for equal work, meaning women are still sometimes paid less than their male counterparts, even though they're doing equal or substantially similar, like in states like New York, we'll talk about in a minute, that have made the law a bit broader. They're doing essentially the same job but being paid less. And that can be as a result of intentional discrimination, where an employer thinks differently about a woman and what she is or should earn or be paid for her work. We often see it in the form of unconscious bias or stereotypes as well. So even though a decision maker who's deciding who should be hired into a job or what pay they should be given, they may not know, but they have an unconscious bias about what a woman should be paid or what job they should be hired into, which they might then make less money. Another big contributor to the overall wage gap is pay secrecy. And we know that kind of traditionally and still to this day, although I think it's loosening a little, which we'll talk about later, there's been this kind of taboo around talking about pay. And because of that, wage gaps are often kept under wraps. And women, particularly women of color, often aren't even aware that they are being underpaid as compared to their male colleagues because no one talks about pay. And we've sometimes seen that kind of manifest in employers actually imposing policies within their workplace that says you can't talk about pay and you will be potentially disciplined for talking about pay. And we'll talk in a minute about some of the policies that we're seeing to counteract these contributors to the wage gap. We're also seeing that women just don't even know what the range is of pay that they might be able to get, which of course then reduces their ability to negotiate higher pay. Another contributor that we know contributes to this overall wage gap is what has traditionally been a pretty common practice of employers asking a prospective employee or candidate about their prior salary. What did you make in your last job? I know personally, I think up until a few years ago, every job I ever applied for, I was asked that question, where when we know there is a wage gap in virtually every industry and occupation in this country, we know that if employers are basing their new pay on prior pay, it essentially allows pay discrimination to follow women really throughout their careers. So that, again, we'll talk about a bit about the good news and the policies that are combating these contributors, but that really has been one of the drivers. I'm going to turn it to Bev, I believe, to talk a little bit about a few of the additional contributors that maybe aren't talked about quite as much, but are starting to get a bit more attention.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Jessica, for getting us started with that overview. Before we talk about some of the other contributors, I just want to, thank everyone for inviting me here to talk about equal pay. It's like my favorite topic, so steeped in it at this point. And I just want to mention that PowHer New York, really appreciates the center and your involvement as a partner. Our relationship goes way back to Ann Jawin, who I was honored to know well. And, it's wonderful to see the building in such great shape. You've made so much progress for the women of New York. It's very exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Beverly and Jessica, it's just like such an honor. And I know, I said, I'll let Victoria introduce the two of you because she put it together, and we're so happy to have you both. I also want to say that we could not do it without partners like you and the support of members, elected officials. And I want to give a shout out to Senator Jean-Luc, who's showing up today. And thanks to elected officials like you, these programs are possible. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Cecilia. Yeah, no, it takes everyone, working together to make an improvement on something that is so deeply rooted in our society. I also want to thank Jessica and the Equal Rights Advocates in California. They've been incredible partners. I don't think people realize just how much work is being done on the national level that's affecting the state level of work, and then vice versa. The states are moving some things forward that's helping move things forward on a national level. So, and then just also shout out to now Senator Lou. A lot of the things we talk about in New York City really started with Comptroller Lou, and he really was a groundbreaker, in his use of data to reveal just how terrible some of the gaps are. And then we've worked on that and continue to do it and trying to find some solutions. So thank you. Now, Senator Lou, we're so happy to have you in Albany and taking
I
to the
just did
next
what
level.
Beverly told me to do.
Well, I wish other people listened to me as well, but we're making progress. We'll talk about our progress in New York in a few minutes, but I think Jessica went over many of the causes of the wage, of the gap that reflects these numbers that we talk about. And I think that sometimes we just have to realize just how much this is affecting people's lives. This is people who are not women and mostly women of color who are not getting paid fairly, or they don't have the opportunities. And it's so important to think about who this is and just, realize that our work is hopefully changing the lives of women and families. Jessica, you went over some points that are really important in the wage gap, and that's what we focused on a lot. But I think that there's a whole other piece of the puzzle that I just want to touch on. And it's the value of the work that women do. And this is not as easy to get at because these are really deeply rooted prejudices or stereotypes that are so deep inside, not just Americans, but, the attitudes about women across the world. And the way our work, which is often work of caring and nurturing, is just not valued. And if you, Ellen Bravo in her book, asked the question of why are women who take care of our children and our elderly, why are they paid less than men who watch over cars and buildings and lawns? One group has to be trained, they have to be licensed, accredited, and take care of people, and yet we devalue their work because it's nurturing, it's about caring. And it's a sad reality, but it's really true. I think what we see is that women are overrepresented in certain jobs. We call this industry and occupational segregation. And wherever women are congregated, the pay is less. That's the reality that we deal with. This is especially true for care workers. And by care workers, I'm talking about childcare workers, domestic workers, home health aides. And these groups of workers, which are huge numbers, actually, are paid well below average. And it affects them throughout their lives. They have lack of benefits often, but they also, now retire on wages and resources that are diminished. And this is really part of the whole conversation about older women in poverty as well. So when a job is female dominated, it's typically mostly women. And when men come into that job, they typically get a boost. They're getting paid more than the women. But when women go into jobs that men are dominated, they're not welcomed nearly as much, right? And it's not like they're going to get, oh, wow, I'm so glad you're in, you're now working in building trades. We welcome you. It's just not the case. So when women do go into jobs in larger numbers, then the salaries start going down. So it's really about these are just proof of just, is this about women and the way we value them? And it absolutely is. Let's take a look at the caring economy. One of the largest negotiations and fights are going on right now in Albany, as the senator can attest to, is around wages for care workers. And by care workers, there are two big groups. We're child care workers. Those are people, people who teach or care for children age 0 to 5. And 96% of them are women. 96% are women, which is incredible. And that's about, in New York, they're taking care of 1.3 million children, a lot of kids, and it's almost 90,000 workers. So this is a huge pool of workers. They're 50% women of color. If you look at home care workers, more than 77% women of color, and a huge majority of them are immigrants, whether they're documented, whether citizens or not, but they're immigrant roots. And you're talking about 500,000 workers in New York alone. So these are huge numbers. And within both industries, there's an expected need for growth, particularly in the home care industry. They're expecting at least 33% increase over the next 10 years. And yet right now there's a huge shortage. So, here you have jobs that women take. Almost half of them have some level of poverty, and they're working under very difficult conditions for very little money. So you can imagine that right now, when there are other options, women are moving into other jobs, but this is leaving a giant hole in our care industry, and particularly in the home care industry. I think we know the pandemic. One good thing is that people became really aware of just how important childcare is. And it's important to be fair to childcare workers. They're paid too low. Obviously, but we also have to say, what does this have to do with all workers, with families? And I think that the pandemic really showed us that without the childcare infrastructure, without accessible and affordable childcare, that women particularly, just can't do their jobs. And it really, it affects women. It always has. And it's one of the reasons that we call, there's a motherhood penalty or a mommy's penalty for women who take care of their children, even if they can fit it all in one day, there's still a penalty. But on the other hand, when men take on these caregiving jobs, they're kind of boosted, and it's so wonderful that you're, going home early today, to take care of your kids. When women do the same thing, they're seen as inferior workers instead of people who are just trying to juggle everything and make everything work. So it's really a conundrum, that we have. And, I think that there's so many disparities, in these two fields. And it starts very young. It starts when young women start to look for jobs. What can I do? They see what other people around them are working on. They see this is the limit of their possibility, perhaps. But women are often steered into low-paying jobs. And that's something that we really have to counteract. On the other side, there are really good jobs out there that women don't have, and they're not welcomed into those job categories, non-traditional jobs in the trades. And also the fantastic green economy, which is going to grow and really flourish as a place for people to get better paying jobs. So while we want to raise the salaries and the working conditions for women in the care industries, we also want to encourage them to go into these other industries that are higher paying and they are living wages. So we sort of have it's happening in two ways. Where women are not working, those are male dominated jobs. We want them to enter them, but we also want to value, the hundreds of thousands of women who work every day in the care industry, value their work, value women's work, value nurturing. We have to do both if we're really going to close the wage gap, and more importantly, improve the lives of women here in New York and across the country. So that's just an overview of this other part of wage equity that's not equal pay for equal work or equal pay for substantially similar work, which is a lot clearer. This is a lot deeper. And I think it's much harder for us to really make progress, but we're determined to do that. So let me just pause there.
Thank you so much for shedding more light on the wage gap. Jessica, there has been a lot of movement in the states on pay equity. Can you talk about what some of these new laws do?
Sure. So as I'm sure everyone has observed, there has been a lot of movement, which is exciting. I think there's a kind of at least the most attention I've seen on this issue of the wage gap and how to address it. And I just want to really appreciate Bev for lifting up these kind of maybe less talked about contributors, which I agree are a bit more kind of amorphous. So we have, but there are some ongoing efforts in those areas. So you'll hear about those. But to start with, some of the trends that we're seeing are states passing equal pay laws or amending existing equal pay laws that go further than the Federal Equal Pay Act. So the Federal Equal Pay Act has been on the books for, we're about to celebrate the 60th anniversary. It's an important law, and it requires that employers pay employees equally for equal work. So you can't pay a woman less than a man, or vice versa, although that's usually the way we see it. The way the issues come to us are usually women being paid less than men for, the statute says equal work. The EEOC and courts say that that's interpreted as substantially equal. So it doesn't have to be to the exact, every detail equal. And that was a great first start. But we've seen that some courts are a little too stringent and will find that very minute differences in job duties allegedly justify, significant or any pay gap. And so kind of going outside of what really the spirit of the law was. So some states have amended or passed equal pay laws that are a broader comparison of work. So as you heard Bev and I mention the term substantially similar, states like California, New York, and others have amended our equal pay laws to say you have to pay workers equally for substantially similar work. So there might be a few additional differences, but it's still essentially the same or very similar, and they should be paid similarly. To make sure that people are being paid when you're essentially doing the same or very similar work. The second kind of bucket of laws that we've seen address that contributor to the wage gap that I mentioned, which is employers traditionally relying on salary history when they make an offer to a new employee. And really that's served as a way to keep wages as low as possible. Whatever that person made in their last job, maybe give them a little bump. And so now, as I'm sure everyone knows, there's kind of a growing trend. We're up to 17 states, including Puerto Rico, Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, that do not allow employers to ask about prior salary. Virtually all, if not all, allow the worker or the employment candidate to share that information if they want to. If they think that will help them in their negotiations, then they can share what they're making. And then of course the employer can discuss that, but they can't ask and they can't outright, and they can't rely on prior salary when they're setting pay. So that's an attempt to stop that problem of past pay discrimination following women, particularly women of color, really throughout their careers because of that practice. And, you hear a lot from employers griping about, well, now how do we set pay? We have no idea how to do it otherwise, which there are a lot of resources out there of how to estimate market rate for a given position for employers. So should you hear that question, you can come to me for some of those resources of how they might do that apart from asking. And I will note that I think some of the kind of tide is turning in terms of employers' acceptance of why this is not a good practice to follow. And in fact, SHRM, the human resources entity that I think we all know about, SHRM, they actually have come out with a position that employers should not rely on prior salary. So I think some of the kind of public understanding of the harm of that practice is growing. We're also seeing, right now, we're in a really big moment of an increase in pay transparency laws. And I kind of use that term pay transparency pretty broadly. So some of the laws that we've seen over the last few years in this regard to increase pay transparency have been addressing that issue that I mentioned of kind of pay secrecy rules, where employers will either have an outright or maybe kind of unwritten rule look down upon for people to talk about pay. But sometimes we actually see them have policies saying you can't talk about it. So some states are passing laws that say you can't prohibit workers from discussing or disclosing pay, and it's illegal to retaliate against them for doing that. There is an argument, I wouldn't even say argument. The National Labor Relations Act should be a protection at the federal level against against retaliation by employers against workers for discussing pay. But it's good to just have it explicit in state law. So then there's no doubt about it for employers that they cannot retaliate against workers when they do talk about pay. Another bucket of pay transparency laws are requirements around posting of salary ranges, which I know you all New Yorkers were either leading in the case of some of you and or supporting or reading about, which is requiring, as I said, employers to include salary ranges. And we know when they post a job, we know that when workers have information about what the potential range might be, that gives them, especially women, more information with which to negotiate higher pay. I don't think I ever in my career have seen a salary range, and knowing what that high number was might incentivize me to ask for a little bit more. And so that's the idea here. Some states require it in all job postings. Some states have some employee thresholds. So for example, in New York State and city, again, thanks to the leadership of Bev and all her colleagues and many of you on this call, it applies to employers with 4 or more employees. So it kind of varies by state, but that we see as a really important trend. Similarly, some of those laws, in addition to requiring salary ranges in a posting, also require an employer to provide an existing employee with the salary range for their own position if they ask for it. So we just passed a law here in California that took effect. We passed it last year, took effect this year, that if an employee asks, the employer has to give them their salary range, which is a really important step because it requires employers to have a range, and it requires them to be able to answer why someone falls where they fall and what are the qualifications that land you at that point in the salary scale, which surprisingly enough, a lot of employers don't really have a lot of criteria in place. So that's another important kind of piece on that. And then the last, and I would just say there are a number of states that are considering these pay transparency laws right now, bills. Thanks again to those in New York and California and Washington, Colorado, having seen that these can get passed and have had at least initially positive results. There's some studies out of Colorado, which was the first state to do this, showing kind of positive impact of having required employers to include salary ranges and postings. So we're hoping to kind of collect additional information. There's a lot more to say on that, but I'll leave it there on the salary transparency, salary posting bucket. But one last note I wanted to make within this kind of pay transparency realm is pay data collection and reporting. And I know Senator Liu, you have been a big advocate on data, and we all know as a policymaker and us as advocates, how critical it is to just have data to be able to show the need for these policies. So at the federal level, the EEOC tried valiantly, but during the prior administration, it was taken away to require employers, large employers, to report their pay data to the EEOC to help with enforcement of our equal pay and anti-discrimination laws, to help employers uncover wage gaps they may not be aware of. That has stalled at the federal level. We're hopeful the current EEOC will be able to reinstate it, but some states, and by some I mean 2, have instituted pay data collection and reporting rules. So here in California, employers have to collect and report pay data to our state enforcement agency. And Illinois, they have a somewhat different format, but they have a pay data collection component to their law as well. So that's kind of some of the world of pay transparency bills that we've been seeing in the states. And I will turn it back to you, Victoria. And as I think everyone said, if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. I'm always happy to talk. As you can tell, like Bev, I really like talking about equal pay. So happy to answer more specific questions about these bills if you want to talk later.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We really learned a lot about what's going on in other states. Now back to Bev. New York has made some progress in passing stronger equal pay laws. What more is needed, and what are ongoing efforts in our state to better address the wage gap?
Thank you. That's happy to show you some successes that we've had. Just want to make sure I get to the right here. Okay. So we practiced this before, right? And now I'm having a little trouble finding my slides. Can you just give me a minute?
No worries.
problem.
Take your time,
Yeah.
Beverly. I just want to
Okay, yeah,
comment
just give me
while
one
you
second.
look for the slides. No worries.
I appreciate that.
Like when you were talking before, you made me think so much. I mean, I've been very lucky. I decided to stay home and take care of my 3 children, but and I recently went back to work after 8 years. And it was mainly driven because of my 3 daughters questioning, like, Mom, like, you do so much work, not only at home, but you volunteer like for the center, and why don't you get paid? And I wish my 3 daughters took off half of the day as a school to hear all that you're doing, because they are so motivated to do something about this issue, and they can see it at their young age. So just like a big shout out to all that you're doing to change the law, and thank you again, Senator Lou, and like everyone that works to change this. It's like so important.
Right.
And I apologize. I turned off my camera. I was like also cooking,
Oh,
but
that's okay.
I'm paying a lot of attention.
Can you, thank you. Can you see the screen now? It says New York.
Yes, we can
Great.
see it.
Okay, terrific. So, Jessica, you went over so many, of the kinds of laws that are being passed, and we've had a equal pay campaign. Actually, the first equal pay day rally was in New York City in 2007. And I always say that there were, 5 of us wearing red, because women are still in the red. And now this last equal pay day, which was Tuesday, we had about 150 people actually crammed into a large room because it was snowing out. It was the first time we ever had an equal pay day indoors. But over the course of those years, we've worked very hard to, take steps to keep chipping away at the causes of of unfair pay. And so, as Jessica talked about in 2015, we looked at protections for workers who talk about their salaries. There are loopholes that we tried to close. We increased penalties. So this was a start. And then we did have executive orders around just what you talked about, Jessica, about reporting equal pay data. It didn't really go too far, but that concept was accepted, but we need to go back and work on that. And then under Governor Cuomo, he did institute a salary history ban for the New York State workforce. But it took us a little while till we could get that done, actually in 2017 and 19. Substantially similar work. We've done that. It's very important. We also expanded the protected categories. So it's not just women, it's also around race as well. There are more protected categories that, which is really important because women often fit into more than one category. They're often a woman of color, they're, where they have different sexual preferences and identities, and they're a woman, right? So there's that intersectionality about wage discrimination. We did pass a salary history ban, and now the salary range disclosure laws, first in New York City, then in New York State. And that's really exciting. I think it's been a game changer for California and New York to have done this. And then lastly, about the reporting of equal pay data, I want to thank the Senate and Assembly for passing 2 laws at the end of a session, which were not signed by the governor. So we have some work to do there. And I think the laws the bills can be improved, but also we need to show just how important it is for employers to report equal pay data. And this is something that's happening routinely in Europe. As a matter of fact, it's now required across Europe, but for the United States, it's still considered a lift. So we'll be working on that. And then just going back to something where we started, which is comparable worth, and that's looking at the value of work and trying to adjust pay for that. So that's sort of where we've been. Let's see. There you go. To get things done very quickly, you have to do a lot of work, and organizations. We brought in groups like ERA and others, to help us with the legal writing, with the data analysis, and lobbying expertise. We don't have that at PowHer, but we're a network of folks who bring that to the table. We've done all these equal pay day forums, et cetera. We use at PowHer a lot of social media to spread the messages and get people engaged, writing letters, either tweeting or posting, or sending letters of support to legislators, obviously meetings, testimony, hearings. Letters to the editor is a really interesting way to get these ideas out into the public as well. Particularly interesting in New York because there are many small newspapers across the state. Now, in New York City, you can't get anything published, but across the state you can. And so in all these small communities, which are often more conservative, there are letters to the editor talking about equal pay. So there are all these things that we've done, to move the issue forward. A lot of it's education, and engagement, and then, using means to facilitate change. And then lastly, our political allies and our business allies. Nothing happens without our political allies, like the senator. We've done legislative briefings so we can bring them along to have the information they need to be able to fight for these causes. And we've had press events. We've passed some of these laws in other counties before we actually could get them to New York City, or we could get them passed on a state level. It's a different strategy. So we have done that, particularly with the salary history ban and the salary range disclosure laws. They were passed in Westchester, Suffolk. Ithaca has a law around that. And another fun thing we do, I think it's interesting, is that on equal pay days, we ask for quotes and video testimonials from our leaders. And so here you can see just some of them who spoke out. We have advocates here, you'll recognize a few faces of leaders who were saying that this is really important work and that it should be, it should move forward. So it's like a whole long-term strategy about how do we move change. And just want to add to that, with New York City's salary range, there's now 75% compliance. So it started out where, I think businesses are saying, what do you mean we have to put salary ranges in? What do you mean I can't ask someone's salary history? I have the right to do that. But when people understand that these are the roots of discrimination, this is where it happens and how it plays out, in time, it becomes socially unacceptable to ask for salary, histories, because they understand this is where we cement in lower wages. So it's been really interesting to see, sort of an acceptance of these changes, and it's really changing our culture. So we have the big culture change of the value of women's work, but I think some of these changes are very important too. So we have a lot of work still to do on these, but and we have a whole list of work we want to do. Governor Hochul released, and I can put the study in or share it with you after, Victoria and Cecilia. Governor Hochul, for Equal Pay Day this year, she released a report on the gender wage gap following the pandemic and made some very good recommendations. Not all the ones that we asked her, that we've been pushing for, but some of them. And some of them are getting women into green jobs. Others have to do with reporting of data. We'll see how far they go with it. But I think these ideas are really becoming very much part of the political conversation in New York, and we're moving forward on all of them. And it's exciting. It's exciting to see change, and knowing that that's really going to affect how much money families have and, just the quality of life for so many women across the state. So let me pause there.
Thanks so much, Bev. Back to Jessica. what bills are moving in other states and at the federal level?
So there, as we've kind of been emphasizing, there's just been a lot of, and continues to be a lot of great movement in the issue, in the area of kind of pay equity and other ways to close the wage gap. I touched on the pay transparency bills that are moving, which is very exciting. And if people are interested, we could send a full list of the current states that are considering those types of bills. Again, as Bev said, I think having Colorado and Washington did it, but having New York and California now pass these types of laws really helps to show, I think, other states that they should follow that lead. So it's an exciting kind of effect that we have beyond just in New York or beyond just in California and other states. Other trends that we're seeing moving, I wanted to just note, we didn't touch on this a lot, but it's something that I know Bev and I both focus on, that laws that combat sexual harassment and better protect workers against sexual harassment and other forms of harassment and discrimination really are a key economic security issue as well. And I think both PowHer New York and equal rights advocates and a lot of our partners in this kind of pay equity and equal pay world really do see as one pillar of that combating harassment, because we know that it often leads to women either being pushed out of a job or otherwise affected in their salary because they are either dealing with or trying to avoid harassment. And as Bev said, it's often intersectional. So it's often not just based on sex, but also race or also national origin. So I just wanted to note that there are many states that have already strengthened protections against sexual harassment and other forms of harassment and discrimination. And there are bills that continue to move in that realm, which we see as kind of critical to this bigger pay equity, economic security pie. Also, we're seeing, I wouldn't necessarily say a trend, but hopefully it will become one. And I wanted to note it because it's important, is addressing the issue of caregiver discrimination. So discrimination against family caregivers, people who care for a child or an elderly parent or a sick relative or a disabled relative or whoever it may be. There are actually 4 states that already have laws on the books that make it illegal for an employer to discriminate against someone because of their being either a parent, so parental status, or another kind of family caregiver. And actually 4 states and over 150 localities. So it's not a new concept, although I don't hear it being discussed a lot. We have a bill in California right now that would do it here, make it illegal for an employer to discriminate against someone because of being a family caregiver. These laws don't, and this bill doesn't give caregivers any extra special treatment, require employers to do anything differently or extra beyond what they would do for other employees. But just like they can't discriminate on race, gender, ethnicity, et cetera, you can't discriminate based on caregiver status. And we know that this is important for people of all genders, but women in particular experience this type of discrimination, usually in the form of kind of biases or assumptions about their abilities based on being a caregiver. You know, she has 3 kids, so we shouldn't give her that promotion because she won't be able to put in those long hours or meet with those high profile people when we need her. Things like that really serve to keep women from gaining higher paid positions and even being hired into them. So I want to note that as something that's moving, but hopefully it will be even more momentum in the States. And then I also wanted to note, because I want to make sure have some time for questions, that at the federal level, the Paycheck Fairness Act has been reintroduced for, I don't know, Bev, is it the 10th time, 10th year in a row, 10th time's a charm? Probably not with this Congress, but as we learned from the Pregnant Worker Fairness Act that was passed last year and signed into law by President Biden and will take effect in June and provides important protections for pregnant women and other pregnant people, that was a 10-year fight and we did not give up. So I am going to keep that momentum up, and I hope all of you will, with the Paycheck Fairness Act. And I wanted to note it because it strengthens our federal equal pay law. It's great that all of our states, some of our states, are doing passing these stronger laws, but we really don't want people's rights to depend on their zip code. And having a clear strong federal law will ensure that everyone is protected. So the Paycheck Fairness Act would close some of the kind of loopholes and gaps in the Federal Equal Pay Act, similar to what Bev and I have been talking about, making the work comparison a bit broader, substantially similar instead of equal, kind of closing some of the loopholes that allow employers to justify paying a woman less than a man based on reasons that are completely unrelated to their business, and some other kind of important changes to ensure that our federal law adequately protects people against pay discrimination. So I wanted to note that as well. And then finally, I wanted to note that I think Bev mentioned all the amazing ways that people can get involved with the great work of PowHer. I'm just going to put in the chat a link to, if you want to join the Equal Rights Advocates Action Team, you'll get action alerts about these types of bills that are moving in different states and also at the federal level, and how you can support them. So the link I just put there is, you'll just get those email updates about how you can support these policies.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Jessica.
For those of you watching this recording later on, please go to equalrights.org and you will find the Joint Action Team there, equalrights.org. Thank you so much, Jessica. That is really the goal of this think tank series, is to end with a take action. How can we, the people on the call, take action? How can our partner organizations join together to take action? So thank you both, Beverly and Jessica, for giving us some points, and we will review them later. But now, if anyone has any questions.
Victoria, I just want to mention that in terms of taking action, people can, call their legislators about supporting the care economy, as well as the minimum wage, raising the minimum wage, which is so much a part of that. So that's something that you can do right now. And then let's sometime in the future talk about the New York State Equal Rights Amendment, because that's going to, deal with a lot of the things that we're doing. So there's a lot of work. There's no way you could just work all day on these things and engage your friends. And that's really what we have to do. So
Let's not forget about the federal equal rights.
Absolutely. So I just want to share something that was really, really big for our organization, but for this particular cause, we did get a grant. We didn't get the money yet, because I'm sure all of you know how that works, from the federal government, from the Department of Labor. And the whole point is to, help women re-enter the workforce. And as a take action today, like for me at least, and we're open to hear any other, anyone from the audience or Jessica, Beverly, to give us more than you already have given us actions. But I would love to work with you, like if join forces and to use these funds like properly. And it was granted by Congressman through Congressman Tom Suozzi, and we're excited. We're not sure when we're going to get the funds, but we want to start working now to help women, get fair pay and equal pay, and also help them with all those challenges that you mentioned, right? Like childcare, family, aging family members, and caring for them, pregnancies and all that. So we're so happy to have started this conversation. I want to see it as that, as a start of a conversation on our end. I know that you talk about this every day. It is at the core of our mission, and that's why we worked really hard to get that grant. And we're so looking forward to, to many actions on this. And yes, let's open it up. I know we're almost at time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but please, if there are any questions from the audience for the panelists, for the amazing panelists, thank you.
Victoria, I think we said that we'd be able to stay a few minutes beyond, right? If Jessica and I talk too much, and we went down to the wire on time. So I mean, also we can come back with answers too. So. Are there any questions?
If there are any questions, like I have a question that I want to ask. Jessica, you said that there were talks about like, sorry, I'm blanking now, but so when you go, I know that there are recommendations, so you could not ask a potential employee about their previous salary. Do you have any idea of what the recommendations would be in this new, hopefully new law, for caregivers, for parents, for moms? Because you can say, sorry, I can't provide you that information, how much I made. If you're being asked, like, how many kids you have, how what ages or whatever, is that something that will be into, like, in the law, that potential employers cannot ask you those questions?
That's a great question. That raises a point that under existing law, even if you don't live in one of those 4 states or within a locality that has a explicit protection against caregiver discrimination, so the majority of states don't have that protection. It's not at the federal level. There are, of course, protections against discrimination based on gender and gender identity and gender stereotyping. So there's actually often kind of a patchwork of laws that employees use now when they're treated negatively because of being a caregiver. They can sometimes assert a claim under existing law, like under a sex discrimination law or a gender identity discrimination law or a sex stereotyping law. And in fact, this is the point we're trying to make with the employers. They don't quite agree. We believe it actually provides clarity, because there is this patchwork of existing law that workers sometimes try to use when they are discriminated against based on caregiver status, based on existing law. It makes it much clearer to just say there's a bright line rule. You can't discriminate against someone or treat them negatively because they're a caregiver, as compared to a non-caregiver. But to your question, there is no explicit prohibition on an employer asking someone if they have kids or if they're planning to have kids, but it would be pretty, what's the more professional term for stupid? I'll just say it, stupid in my view as a lawyer. And I think most employers, though, you never know, as I think my mother's actually on this call, as my father used to say, you never underestimate the stupidity of certain groups of people. You never put it past someone to ask. But because there could be a pretty clear potential gender discrimination or sex discrimination claim, I would argue that most employers probably wouldn't ask. I think back in the day, though, that was pretty common, and they might still try to get at it, in kind of back ways, so are you on any school committees, or I don't know, ways to kind of get at how if someone is a parent or how involved they are in their children's lives. So to kind of not very short answer your question, they wouldn't have an explicit in these caregiver discrimination laws. They don't have an explicit prohibition on that kind of question, but I think it would, even under existing law, and definitely in a state with a caregiver discrimination protection, be likely potentially unlawful to ask that kind of question.
Right. The problem that with many of these laws, that it's up to the worker, right, to sue someone. So you don't even have the job, with this company. It puts you in a position where do you really want to do that? Do you really want to? And so these kinds of things can keep happening. I think that's what's so great about the salary range laws. It puts the action in the hands of the employers. They have to do something, right? But it's difficult, even though it may be illegal. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, right? So
yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're on mute.
I think that's a great point, Beverly. We recently had the Commission of Human Rights give a workshop for career skills, and it's a lot of information that you have to know to be able to take the steps that you need to take, right? Like if you have been discriminated against because of one of their categories, and it's the same. I feel that education is something, and thank you for that, because it helps us plan, what, like, our programs. We just opened in person a year ago, after many years talking about challenges for women. Our building was on the works for 18 years because of an elected official that didn't believe in a building being dedicated just to women, for women. So as we build our programming, I think this information, how to do it, I have a friend who recently was fired, and she called me like, do you have any information? I feel that this is discrimination, and having programs that will educate women on how to deal with certain questions, or if they feel that they have been discriminated against because of their gender or their caregiver status. It will be, I think, very valuable.
One of the laws in New York State is that lawyers get, they get paid for some of these lawsuits, so that's another way around, this problem of it's up to the individual, so that's one of the things too that we've instituted. And also in the New York City human rights law, there also is, fees for lawyers. So, at least people will take these cases, right? That can be proven, but it's a lot of work when someone's not even going to be paid to do it. You're not going to get a lawyer. So that's another, all these are pieces to breaking down all these barriers to, being able to defend your rights. So.
Cecilia and Victoria, if I could add one thing before we close, I forgot to mention that we the Equal Pay Today campaign, which ERA kind of chairs, so I put a link to that website, lead equal pay days every year. So we just, as you all know, did the kind of big equal pay day, average women versus average men on March 14th, and Bev and her colleagues and you all did some great work in New York on that. And then we'll have many more throughout the year. So the next one is AANHPI Women's Equal Pay Day on April 5th. And then Black Women's Equal Pay Day in August, Native Women's Equal Pay Day in November, and Latina Equal Pay Day in October. There's a few more. There's a Mom's Equal Pay Day. So I'm happy to send that to you, Victoria, to circulate to everyone. And if you want to be added, well, you should join Bev PowHer's listserv, because then you'll get the toolkit that we put out for each of the equal pay days, so that you can join in a social media storm that we do each equal pay day. It's always at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern. And in that toolkit, you'll have sample social media that you can just post right into your social, so you don't have to think about it.
Terrific.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for making it easy too.
Right. Got to make it easy for people.
For
So.
women, especially. So much on your plate.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you for that. We'll definitely participate in those days. And thank you, May. We will definitely send you the recording or the slides. Thanks again to Senator Liu for coming and for you being here, May.
No problem. I'm just working from the office, so there's a lot of background noise. I just wanted to make sure, that I sent that out. Thanks to everyone today.
I appreciate you. Thanks. All right. Thank you all for coming. You are incredible. You both, Jessica and Beverly. Again, hopefully this is start of, well, I know the partnership has been very long. It's just like I am new to this partnership, I guess, and I'm happy for that. So Victoria, thank you so much. Would you like to close us out?
Well, I would like to reiterate, equalpaytoday.org is the other resource that Jessica gave us. And the other organization, PowHerNewYork.org, is another resource for pay equity taking action.
That's PowHerNY.org. So I just put it into the chat so people could take action on the budget.
PowHerNY.org.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, thank you so much. Our website is CWNY.org for anyone here that would like to see more of our programs. We're working on more. We hope to see you in other think tank sessions in the future. Thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.